Hello, everyone, and welcome to Happy Feet. Tonight, our topic is Healthy Eating Made Easier with Devon Kroesche. Devon is a registered dietitian and serves as the Chief Marketing Officer for Sarah Lynn Nutrition. She has it's a private telehealth practice providing functional nutrition therapy to prevent chronic disease and optimize health through a holistic approach of sustainable diet and lifestyle changes. Devon received her bachelor's and master's degree in nutrition and dietetics from the University in Pittsburgh and completed her clinical fellowship at UPMC Presbyterian Hospital. Devon combines her clinical expertise as a dietitian with active listening skills and collaborative counseling approach to support individuals at every stage of their lives. She feels strongly that every patient deserves a tailored approach to their nutrition that restores their energy and helps them feel their best. Okay, Devon, take it away.
Thank you so much. And now hearing that bio makes me realize it's a mouthful, so I'm going to have to condense that. So thank you. But hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. I am so excited to be speaking to you all tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, so I might not be able to see all of your individual faces as I speak. But Jen, if there's tech glitches or if there's questions that need to be answered as I go along, feel free to shout them out for me. But just so you all know, I will definitely be leaving at least, I would say, 15-ish minutes at the end for some Q&A if you have more specific questions. With that said, I always keep in mind that you all have your own individual health journey and history and goals. And so for more specific questions, I might ask you to shoot me an email, just so I can kind of better understand the context in your history. But general questions, we should definitely make sure we get the chance to cover today. So go ahead and okay. Is everyone able to see this well? Perfect. Okay. All right. So I will go ahead and get started, but I am just so we already have some questions. Great. I will make sure I save these for the end because these are really good ones. And I know that everyone here is at a different stage in their health journey. I know we have some support people and some caregivers. We also have folks who are actively going through the cancer treatment journey or who are survivors. And so we all have different needs and different priorities at different stages. But what I realize is that there are some really good um, tenets or basics of nutrition that we can pretty much, for the most part, all benefit from. So I'll be talking about that in great detail today. And then another thing that I realize that a lot of my patients tend to struggle with is not so much the what they're supposed to eat, it's the how do I make it happen, right? When we are limited on energy, we're limited on time. We are maybe not able to get to the grocery store because of all the snow we got in Pittsburgh this week. So, how do we make these things really work for our day-to-day life? So that's something that I'll be talking about as well. We'll even talk about how, our emotions play into some of our eating choices and how to navigate those things, right? Because I don't know about you, but I have eaten my feelings before. We've all done it, right? So how to make good choices, even when, maybe we're maybe in a slightly vulnerable state of being exhausted or just being really short on time or things like that. So try to make it as easy as possible. But I would love to, before we get started, if anyone's willing to share, I'm hearing that we're doing a ton of movement and exercise, which is very impressive. I'm hearing we're doing some strength training with the bands. I love, love, love to hear that. I'm curious, is there anything that we're currently focused on nutrition goals wise? I know, again, it's a lot of activity stuff, but anything that anyone's focused on goals wise with their nutrition, even just individually? Feel free to unmute yourself and just shout it out or drop it in the chat if you
Well,
prefer.
Devin, if we in the recording, not everybody shares, so it's probably better to we can do that maybe after
Yeah,
if
at
that's
the
okay.
end. Perfect. Okay, well, I will go ahead and get started then. So we're talking about healthy eating made easy. I should share too, I know this was shared in the introduction, but I work for a company called Sarah Lynn Nutrition that we do one-on-one nutrition counseling through insurance. So if anyone is interested in more of like that personalized stuff, I will make sure I include my email as well. So if you're looking for more of that personalized approach, I'm happy to get you supported and connected there. Okay. So I'm a dietitian. I'm your nutrition navigator. I also like to eat just like all of you. And so I'm hoping that throughout today we can talk about how to navigate busy lives, competing goals, achieving your health and wellness goals, and also enjoying the process, right? I think anything that we're trying to achieve when it comes to long-term changes to our health and well-being, it needs to be something that we can find some enjoyment of because otherwise it's going to be really, really hard to stick to. So there's lots of different ways of eating that can be considered a healthy, balanced diet. And, different eating schedules, different meal preferences, lots of things that can work for you, but it needs to be something that is doable for your life, something that is, you're not fitting your life around your diet, you're fitting your diet around your life. Maybe we need to make some lifestyle changes here and there, maybe get to bed a little bit earlier so we're not snacking in the evening, things like that. But we really want to make this something that works for you in your life. So we're going to dive right on in. And before we get into the how, I like to talk about the what, the nutrition fundamentals. So this might be stuff that you've heard before. This might be just a slightly different way that it's presented. But before we start talking about how we're going to implement these changes, I want to make sure that we're all fairly on the same page in terms of what does a balanced meal, what does a balanced day of eating look like. So this is my little Venn diagram here. When I'm trying to support someone in optimizing their nutrition, I think about these three elements: their quality, our quantity, and the timing. And so interestingly, I think a lot of people are focused on more so the quantity and the quality, but they don't think about how the timing of their nutrition actually impacts those other two things. And so when I'm helping someone build a healthy day of eating, or a nice like meal plan, let's say, I first ask them to walk me through their day. What time are we waking up? What time are we going to bed? Are we running back and forth to appointments? Are we navigating caring for other people in our household? Or, whatever it is that you are navigating day to day, I want to know what your day looks like so we can figure out where does nutrition fit in here and how can we use nutrition as a way to really best support you. And I will tell you that our bodies really like routine. Um, it likes to kind of eat around the same times every day. So the more that you're able to find some sense of a day-to-day schedule, I think it helps you logistically in terms of planning your meals for the week, but it also helps support your body and making sure that it can expect energy at certain paces throughout your day. So that's usually where we start. We'll talk about the timing, and I'll get into more detail about what I mean by that. And then I'll usually talk about the meal quality. And so first we want to talk about making sure that all of the nutrients are present at a meal. So the different food groups usually are corresponding to certain nutrients. Again, I'm starting very high level, but we're going to get more specific as we go along. And then we'll talk about what are some healthier sources of all of those nutrients. So we know that carbohydrates fuel our brain, for example, but there are better and worse choices when it comes to choosing carbohydrates. We want to be opting for maybe more complex carbs like a sweet potato as opposed to a sugary breakfast cereal, right? So those little trade-offs are what we are talking about when we're talking about quality. And then quantity. I feel like this is the thing that people tell me they struggle with the most is portion control. Now, what I find is that when we're really paying attention to eating consistently throughout the day, not going huge swaths of time without eating, and also not grazing throughout the day either, but really having good, consistent meals and snacks throughout our day. And we're balancing those meals appropriately. So we're thinking about that quality piece. Oftentimes, the portion control element of things sort of takes care of itself, but there are a few caveats that I will just kind of like leave as a little surprise for later. But when we can kind of think about these three elements together, that's really where we get our optimized nutrition. So we'll be talking about how to put these pieces together today. Okay, so I mentioned first is timing usually. So building your food flow. So as we're talking here, I want you to think through your day. So again, when are you waking up? When is usually the first time you're eating? Some of my patients will come in and they're not really eating for the first half of the day at all. And then they find that they're really struggling with snacking in the evening. And that makes sense to me, right? As a dietitian, I know that your body is asking for energy maybe you're not picking up on those early hunger signals earlier in your day, and it's sort of catching up with you later in the day. And the end of the day is usually when we have the least willpower. We're exhausted. So we're reaching for the stuff that is the most convenient and usually not the healthiest, right? So let's plan our meals in advance before we're even hungry for them. Let's think about when are we going to be eating. I like to try to plan for us to eat about every 3 to 4 hours. And I would like for you to try to eat your first meal at least within 1 to 2 hours of waking. Now, I know some folks are on medications. They sometimes have to take on an empty stomach, so we want to keep that in mind. So if you're someone who takes a medication like that, you have to take on an empty stomach, I usually recommend that you keep it right by your bedside and try to take it before you even get out of bed. So that will kind of start that clock ticking. So maybe it's an hour you have to wait after you're eating or whatever your doctor instructed you to do. That'll hopefully help you get some nutrition in earlier rather than later, even with some of these considerations. And then from there, we want to again plan every 3 to 4 hours after that. So I'll show you like an example, but if you're finding that you're missing eating windows or if you're grazing throughout the day, it could be why you're having some of these more intense cravings, or maybe reaching for things that you think you shouldn't be having, right? So here's just like an example of day. So maybe we're having breakfast around 8, then we're having lunch around 12. If we had dinner at like 6 o'clock or even 5 o'clock, that would be 5 or 6 hours that we're going without nutrition. So if you're finding that you struggle with portion control at dinner, that might make sense, right? If we're not eating for 5 or 6 hours. So instead of, you know, waiting that long, maybe we're implementing a more intentional afternoon snack. And we'll talk more specifically about what are some good snacking choices, right? Because some people tell me, like, oh, I really struggle with snacking, but snacking is actually a really powerful tool that we can use in our nutrition toolbox here. Okay, so I'm going to move on to that quality piece. So first, we're going to make sure all the friends are at the party. We got to make sure all of our food groups are here. And I really like this My Plate visual because it kind of helps you figure out how to organize your plate. I know this might sound obvious, this might sound like very elementary, but I find that a lot of times if we're struggling with our nutrition, it's that we're just missing some elements. So I always pick on the slice of pizza, right? We wouldn't necessarily think about pizza as a health food generally, right? But really, what does pizza have? Well, it's got the crust, right? That's our carbohydrate or this grains piece. And then it's got some fat, maybe some protein, dairy. So it's got like these pieces. It's really lacking in this side of things. So instead of demonizing the pizza, not that we want to be having pizza every day, but maybe we just want to add a chicken salad to it. Just bulk up the protein, add a little bit more produce to that meal. And especially if we have our veggies and our protein first at a meal, we kind of save the carbs for last. So like let's say we have our chicken breast and our broccoli first, and we save the rice or potatoes or pasta for the end of the meal. It's actually much more difficult to overeat some of those foods. We have a really good base of some of our more nutrient dense foods. A lot of your protein and produce actually digests much more slowly. And so that actually works to our advantage. That really helps manage, if you're concerned about things like your blood sugar, that really helps manage blood sugar spikes, which I find to be really helpful for a lot of my patients. And it gives them more uh, predictable and sustained energy between their meals. Instead of having these big energy spikes and crashes throughout the day, they tend to have a more even energy throughout the day just because they're getting that energy and that nutrition in at a more consistent pace because of the way that their food is digesting. And so if you think about some of your meals that you typically have throughout the day, and you're finding like, wow, there's not really any protein at my breakfast. I'm just having a bowl of cereal, that might be something that you want to add in. Similarly, if you're noticing, I have a ham and cheese sandwich for lunch, but there's really no produce there. Maybe we start by adding something simple, like some applesauce, right? It could just be the smallest little change, but just slowly working towards adding more produce in at most of your meals is kind of where a lot of folks are lacking. And that can make a huge, tremendous difference in your nutrition without even feeling like you need to be tracking or writing down everything. I feel like we live in the information age, so we want to have data on everything we're eating. But really, just some of these little minor shifts don't take a ton of time or energy, but they make such a world of difference when it comes to your nutrition. And then this is another way to think about it. These are the four components that you should have at every balanced meal. We should have some source of produce or protein. That might look like fish or chicken. I really like to add in some plant-based sources of protein. We have really good evidence to support the antioxidant benefits, especially when it comes to cancer treatment, cancer prevention. I love adding in some plant-based sources of protein along with some of the animal-based sources. Um, Things like salmon are really rich in omega-3s, which are high in antioxidants. Your chicken, turkey, things like that. I try to lean towards leaner sources of protein because those are going to be lower in saturated fat, lower heart disease risk, things like that. Of course, we want our produce or your fruits and vegetables. Your carbohydrates. Now, carbs are very demonized lately. I feel like maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was low fat, fat-free everything. And now it's low carb, it's keto, everything. But really, we just need good quality sources of both carbs and fat. And we need them in appropriate portion sizes. So I try to really focus on complex sources of carbohydrates. That looks like things like whole grain breads. I really like the Dave's Killer bread, if anyone's ever heard of that. I really like doing things like the Barilla protein pasta or like a lentil or chickpea pasta. Those are going to give you carbohydrates, but also give you a lot more fiber and protein. So you're getting some of these side benefits with the carbohydrates. You can also get your carbs from things like sweet potatoes or quinoa. These are really great sources of carbs to be adding into your diet that, again, are going to offer more nutrients and are going to digest at an even pace to give you more sustained energy. And then lastly, our fats. I really like to focus on fats that are liquid at room temperature. That's going to mean it's a polyunsaturated fat or monounsaturated fat, as opposed to our saturated fat, which tend to be associated with heart disease and other chronic diseases. And so that might look like things like avocados, nuts, seeds, nut butters. I would love to do things like that. Um, if you like to do things like tahini or trying to think what else. Those are some of my go-to fats. And if you're going to be cooking with anything, I prefer we use the smallest amount of oil as possible. And we use either an extra virgin olive oil or a avocado oil, but you just want to look at the smoke point because we don't want the oil smoking up. It's not great. So that's why I prefer extra virgin olive oil, for example, because it has a higher smoke point than regular olive oil. So those are the four components of those balanced meals. And we can see how some of these foods might fit well into breakfast, right? We're doing oats maybe for breakfast as our carb. And maybe we're doing blueberries in it, right? That's our produce. Maybe we're adding a little Greek yogurt on the side for some protein. And maybe we're sprinkling some walnuts over top for our fats. So boom, we have a balanced meal right there. And we can do the same thing for lunches and dinners. And I'll give you some specific examples. But I think this is a nice way to think about our nutrition more in terms of like, what are we adding in rather than all the things we feel like we need to cut out? I feel like a lot of the nutrition advice is focused on that. And that's not quite as helpful because you're left with, well, what can I even eat then, right? So anyways, these are the four components of our balanced meals. And I like to provide as many visuals as possible. So this is just another example of how we can put together breakfast and snacks, really focusing on your protein. You'll see some produce kind of thrown in here, more so on the fiber side of things. And you will also see more of those complex carbohydrates that I discussed. So oatmeal, some whole grain breads, some whole grain crackers, some fruits and vegetables. On our protein side, things like eggs, yogurt, nuts and seeds, edamame, like I mentioned, that plant-based sources of protein. You see some fish here, tuna or salmon, really good sources of healthy proteins. And I can always send these slides too if you want to go back and look at some of these ideas. But I'm going to just move on and show you, this is how I might organize my plate for lunch and dinner. Now, if you are someone who is trying to gain weight, I would maybe shift this a little bit. Instead of having half of your plate be these non-starchy vegetables, I might scale up and make more like a third, and a third. So a third of your plate be your carbohydrate, a third be the protein, and then a third be your vegetables, because we still want them there, but decreasing your portion size just slightly makes room for some of those foods that have a bit more calories. And so that's really helpful for weight gain. But for most people who are just trying to, maintain or maybe even lose some weight and get to a healthier body weight, this is a really nice way to organize it. So really, really fill up half of that plate with your vegetables, your produce. These things are going to be really, really rich in vitamins and minerals, very naturally satiating. So we love that for portion control and really great for managing our blood sugar, reducing cholesterol. A lot of these vegetables actually have fibers in them that can help bind up some of the cholesterol in your blood and actually help clear things out. So we love that. And then, of course, we have those complex carbohydrates that I keep talking about, and then our protein sources. So think about your day, think about some of the meals that you've had recently, and maybe some of these shifts that we can make. So maybe you realize, my breakfast is lacking in produce. What can I do to add in some? Or maybe it's more so lunch and dinner. Maybe I want to swap out my white rice for some brown rice or my white pasta for some whole wheat pasta. But trying these little swaps, again, we're focused on what we're adding, we're focusing on some healthy swaps as opposed to feeling like we need to cut all these things out of our diet. Okay, so then we talked about quality, we talked about timing. Now, lastly, I really want to make sure we touch on that quantity piece because you might say to me, Devon, I'm balancing my plates, I'm eating consistent meals. Why is it that I feel like still I'm maybe eating even when I'm not hungry, or I'm eating way past fullness before I even realize it? And that last missing piece when it comes to making sure that we're eating the right amount is mindfulness. And mindfulness is a huge buzzword. People love to talk about mindfulness. But what does this mean as it pertains to eating? It just means being present and paying attention to the eating experience. And so there are some really practical tips for how we can practice this. Now, I realize not everyone can practice mindful eating for every meal of their day. Some people are answering emails while they're eating lunch, or maybe they're even eating in their car on their way to an appointment. But at least for one meal a day, my challenge to you is going to be to practice a mindful meal. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to put the screens away. So no computers, no phones. I'm okay with some music. I'm okay with some company. If anyone's joining you for that meal, I think that's always a wonderful thing. I want you to put your food on a plate. I know that sounds like duh, but I actually would love for you to do this for meals and snacks because I find if we're kind of just grazing out of the refrigerator, or if we're kind of just eating from multiple plates or eating standing up at the counter, heaven forbid, we're not really as present for the meal. We're not even be able to visualize that plate that I showed you. So we don't really know how, what our plate breakdown is if we have, 50% produce or 25% protein. We really can't visualize that unless it's on a plate. And then slow it down. Some really great ways to slow it down are to maybe put your fork down, drink some water, things like that, and then check in with your hunger and fullness throughout a meal. So before I was a dietitian, I was a waitress. I worked at a seafood restaurant at the Jersey Shore, and I did that for years and years through college and graduate school. And I learned to pick up on people's fullness cues and kind of when they were looking like they were going to be full. And one thing I always noticed is they would sit back like this. They were literally like making more space in their abdomen. And that was one of those signs that, okay, we're getting full. So if you notice yourself doing that, it might be time to check in and say, hey, maybe I'm actually getting kind of full here. So feel free. That one's totally free on me. Give that one a try. But as often as you can, at least once a day, let's try to practice some of these mindful meals. Check in with our body. I would love for you to start a meal if we're thinking about a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being I'm absolutely empty, ravenous, could eat a horse. 10 being I'm completely overly stuffed and uncomfortable. I would love if we would start our meals at like a 3 out of 10 and finish our meals around a 7 out of 10. And the reason I say this is that it's really easy for us in our day-to-day lives, especially when we're busy, to miss some of those early hunger signals. And early hunger signals might look like thinking about food. Um, just maybe it's been 3 to 4 hours since we've eaten. Maybe we're starting to feel a little bit tired. Energy's starting to feel a little depleted. Maybe we're just feeling those little growly feelings in our stomach. Some of the late hunger cues are the ones we tend to recognize. Feeling like we have a headache, maybe even feeling a little dizzy or a little shaky, feeling irritable. Those are late hunger cues. We want to be able to catch our hunger before then, because those are the moments where we do tend to overeat or we tend to make not great choices. And we're really not supporting our body's natural energy levels. And then on the flip side, I want to stop when we're at about a 7 out of 10. And the reason why is that our stomach actually has these stretch receptors, and these stretch receptors send signals up to our brain to let us know, hey, we've had enough to eat, time to slow down. So adding lots of veggies into our meals is really helpful for that because, again, we're getting more bulk to our meals. So we're getting that stretch without necessarily over consuming calories. But that's really helpful because we need to give our body a little bit of time to be able to send enough signals up to our brain that we finally get it. So that's why I say stop at about a 7 out of 10. You might finish the meal and you're actually more like an 8, 10, 20 minutes later. But these types of practices, it's just like yoga, just like exercise, it's a daily thing, right? So it's something that we always should be practicing because as we practice it more and more, we get better at it. So you might find that the first time, if you're someone who tends to always sit in front of the TV during dinner, the first time you practice this mindful meal, you will probably be annoyed with me. You will probably be like, this is so boring. What am I supposed to do? Just sit here and eat? And the answer is yes. And I do think that it is maybe a little bit boring, but think about it. It's maybe 10, 15 minutes. You can go back to your TV program afterwards, but this is really a time to step away from all the stimulation that we tend to get throughout our day and just have a mindful moment for you. So again, this is not something that's about restriction. It is about satisfaction. And so when we're paying attention, we're engaging with our meals, we do tend to find them more satisfying. So again, if you're someone who struggled with knowing how much does my body need, your body is sending you signals. Of course, that's what dietitians are here for too, to kind of give you an estimate of here's how much I think your body needs throughout the day, but you're going to need more or less on other days. And I think it's good to also have that skill of learning how to listen in. Okay, here's something I get asked a lot, or I get told a lot is I can't stop snacking. What do I do? And we think about snacking as always like a bad thing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be so. And I do think, like we said earlier with that timing piece, it makes sense to plan snacks into your day where snacks make sense. So snacks are not something to graze on between meals. They're more so like bridges to get us from meal to meal. They're kind of mini meals in and of themselves. That's why I say like put it on a plate and make this again another little mindful moment. So if you have that gap of longer than 3 to 4 hours, especially if you're going to be out with appointments and things like that, I know we can be sitting in waiting rooms for a long time. I'm always the lady with a snack in her purse, and I would love for you to be that person too. Always have a snack on hand, whether it's in your car or somewhere else, and I'll give you some more ideas about some snacks. And I know if we're sitting in a waiting room, we can't necessarily put our food or our snack on a plate, but trying to make it as mindful as we can as much as possible. And if we're going to make these like mini meals, we want to be thinking about those food elements when I was talking about quality earlier. So I would love for your snacks to have 2 or maybe even 3 food groups. So I included some of those options here that are more so like snack type foods from each of the categories. And feel free, like a lot of my clients will just like write these down. Like, okay, so my protein options for snacks, I could do cottage cheese, I could do a hard-boiled egg, I could do some edamame. For my produce, I could do some sliced cucumbers or strawberries or grapes. For my carb, I could do some whole grain crackers or some popcorn. And for my fats, maybe I could do a string cheese or some hummus or some guacamole or some nuts or something like that. So from there, we can kind of figure out how we can mix and match. So how do we put some of these things together? Ooh, I have some examples here. So I'm going to ask you to engage. If anyone is willing to maybe drop in the chat, which of these options do we think is going to keep us fuller longer? I know the chips look delicious. I love some Ruffles just as much as anyone else. But that parfait, I think that's got some chia seeds in it. What are we thinking? All right, so we're getting some responses. We say yogurt and fruit, yes. And why? Because it's got multiple elements, right? So if we just had a handful of berries, we probably wouldn't feel very satisfied. Similarly, if we just had the yogurt, we probably wouldn't feel very satisfied. But if we could combine some of these things, that's when we're starting to really get some bang for our buck. And again, this is something that we want to get us from, a long stretch between meals. So we want it to be satisfying. It doesn't have to be a super big portion size. This could be like a tiny little cup, but we want to add in multiple elements. The first thing I hear anytime I do a meal plan with someone is, this feels like a lot of food. And the answer is yes. But the portion size like is fairly small still, and it might just feel like more variety at each of your eating instances than what you're maybe typically used to. All right, next test. Who wants to guess which one's going to keep us full or longer? I don't have any prizes today. I'm sorry. Any guesses? All right, some people say apple, some people say egg. Again, some more votes for the avocado toast with the egg. All right, well, I'm going to say I love apples just as much as the next dietitian, but I'm going to still say that the avocado toast is going to be more satisfying. Why? Because it's got more elements. Now, we could bulk up this apple. We could add to it. We could do an apple with some peanut butter and a string cheese. That would be a lot more satisfying than just the apple on its own. All right, one more, if you'll bear with me. We've got a little snack plate, or we've got a palm full of almonds. Which one is going to keep us fuller quicker or longer? Sorry. Snack plate. Everyone says snack plate. Absolutely. It's the snack plate, right? Because we've got some different food groups here. Now we could add those almonds to the snack plate and it would be beautiful, but on its own, the almonds never going to keep us satisfied. We love that there's fiber and healthy fats and things like that that can add to fullness, but on its own, usually not enough. So we want to add some more to that. So these are just some more snack ideas, some pairings that I really like. A fruit and a fat usually goes really well, right? Because we're getting a lot of fiber and healthy carbs from the fruit, and then we're getting some of those healthy fats in there. So some trail mix with some dried fruit, an apple with some peanut butter. We could pair a protein with a carb, so some granola with some Greek yogurt, some cottage cheese and whole grain crackers, or maybe some popcorn and a beef stick, some produce and protein, so some cottage cheese and cucumber slices, some grapes and a hard-boiled egg. They don't even necessarily have to make sense together, but these are just nice pairings. I think that will leave you feeling a little bit more satisfied. So feel free to steal any of these. These are, try to make them as portable as possible. Okay. Here's another thing I will hear a lot is, why am I eating when I'm not even hungry? So we talked about that mindless eating and snacking, but sometimes there's other things at play, right? We're human beings, we're not robots. Food is more than just fuel, so we don't just eat to survive. Think about all of the fond memories that you have when it comes to eating and nutrition. You know, like maybe it was cooking a meal with a loved one, or maybe it was going out for ice cream after you won a soccer game, right? We have all these beautiful memories when it comes to food, and I like to lean into those instead of feeling like food should just be fuel, right? So I realize that food is a source of pleasure in the brain. That's a good thing. So we get a positive response to foods, especially foods that are what we would call hyper palatable. So those are foods that are high in sugar, fat, and salt. And so some of our cravings are oftentimes those things, right? We're not necessarily craving broccoli because we don't get as much of a dopamine spike from broccoli, as great as it is for us. And so sometimes it becomes a little bit of a coping mechanism. And sometimes we get really down on ourselves about that. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the case, right? So food can be a source of comfort and joy and community and all those things. It just shouldn't be the only thing. So when I have a client who's maybe struggling with this, struggling with kind of just eating for comfort a lot of the time, again, I would never make them feel bad about this, but I would say, like, hey, what else provides you comfort? A lot of times, connecting with a close friend or family member, or maybe not this week, but getting out for some fresh air when we can, whenever it's above 30 degrees here in Pittsburgh. Things like that, I think, tend to fill our cup in a way that maybe food is trying to, but doesn't necessarily always really do the trick. So just something to think about if that's something that you struggle with as well. Um, what else can we do? Just definitely keeping an organized eating schedule. So if you're someone who struggles with more of that like emotional eating, I would first make sure that you have good balanced nutrition, that you're eating on regular intervals and you're not going without meals, maybe due to stress. I know sometimes people really struggle with appetite during stressful times and maybe they're missing meals. Maybe you're struggling with depression, things like that, that can impact our ability to eat, but really maybe having some support, maybe having people bring you meals when you're struggling, or maybe you're going through surgery or treatment or things like that. Having some support with our meals, I think, is really helpful. And then also thinking about what are those other things. I always say never a pill without a skill. So when it comes to, again, some of these stress management techniques, I always want to think about some of the behavioral tools that we have at play. So for some people in the evenings, especially tricky time with this emotional eating, sometimes we just kind of get caught up in our thoughts. So finding things that keep your hands busy is really helpful. One of my clients was recovering from surgery and would do crocheting. Some of them would really get into reorganizing a drawer. I feel like that's like a helpful thing now when we're stuck inside. Reading or doing a puzzle. We like to do paint by numbers in my house. So that's like a fun evening activity that requires us to keep our hands busy. Um, and if you are truly hungry for a snack, have a snack, but think about some of those tips that I recommended earlier. Okay, I want to be mindful of time. So just a few more tips for healthy eating on the go. Again, if you're someone who is just kind of feeling like overscheduled, I always recommend just planning ahead. So if we're going to be out of the house, we want to make sure that we're packing something with us. If we're going to be gone for a very long time, maybe we want to plan a lunch spot in advance. But the more often we can plan a meal before we're hungry for it, the more likely we are to be making a good choice. These are just some of my favorite breakfasts on the go. So I like these little breakfast sandwiches that are pretty healthy. You can just throw in the microwave, some overnight oats, peanut butter toast with maybe a protein shake, or maybe one of those drinkable yogurts with a bar of some sort. Some quick lunches. These are really especially helpful if you're running out to appointments or work or whatever you've got going on, a wrap. Those little bento snack boxes can actually make a nice lunch. We're doing some whole grain crackers, some hard-boiled eggs, some veggies and hummus, things like that. And then I also love a jarred salad, especially this time of year. It can get kind of soggy if we make it ahead of time and bring it on the go, but if we keep all the wetter ingredients towards the bottom and all the leafy greens towards the top, it's a nice way to kind of keep your salad nice and fresh on the go. And then I realize sometimes, we just don't have time, or maybe sometimes we just don't have the energy. So we need a quick, easy dinner. So I love to do some quick microwavable minute rice with a bag of frozen vegetables and maybe some tofu, right? Like that's something that we can easily throw all together in one skillet. I am allergic to dishes, so I like to have as few dishes as physically possible. So a one pot meal or one pan meal is always really helpful. I always really love a sheet pan meal too. So throw out some, throw some parchment paper on a baking sheet, spray it with a little bit of the extra virgin olive oil, and you can put your protein, your veggie, and your carb, like we did here, some sweet potatoes, some broccoli, and some chicken, all in one sheet pan. Throw it in the oven for 20 to 30 minutes, and you have a quick, easy dinner thrown together. Now, you might be looking at me like, Devon, I am not going to be chopping broccoli. You're out of your mind. So this is an even easier version of that. So things like some frozen chicken. I like this brand because it's breaded, but it's breaded with an almond flour, so it's a little bit healthier for us. Again, some minute rice or minute quinoa, and then some frozen veggies. I love these like cauliflower pizzas because you're getting your produce in there. There's even a little bit of protein, so maybe we're pairing that with a little bit of extra protein on the side. Or I love a good box mac and cheese, and this is one of my favorites because it's very high in protein, very high in fiber. It's even got some veggies mixed into the veggie sauce or the cheese sauce, which is great. A salad kit, and then maybe a veggie burger, right? Just really easy things that we can either throw together, no chopping, no really prep involved, can come together in 10, 15 minutes. Okay, and this is one of my tips for grocery shopping in a pinch, because I know sometimes we're just like, the storm's coming, I need to get some groceries. I don't know what to get. Devon, what do I get? You can feel free to screenshot this, but this is one of my favorite tactics. You can pick three veggies, one that pairs well with a meal. So maybe it's some broccoli, one that's a leafy green. We can throw leafy greens in our eggs. We can throw it on the side with the rest of our meal, maybe drizzle a little bit of dressing. And then maybe one that we can have as a snack, like some carrot sticks. Choose three proteins, one that's good as an entree, and maybe it's the chicken breast, one that's maybe really convenient that we can just throw in the microwave, like that veggie burger, or that like Real Good Foods chicken, and then one meatless option. So maybe we're doing some tofu, maybe we are doing a veggie burger. Choose two grains, one that's a good breakfast option, that could be your oats. or like a brand cereal, and then one that's a good lunch and dinner option. So maybe that's some rice or potatoes, two fruits, one that's a snack, one that's good with a meal. So maybe some blueberries for oatmeal, and then maybe some apple slices that we can have as a snack, and then one dip or spread. I try to use something that's versatile and works with both kind of sweet and savory. So like peanut butter can be really good for that. You can do that in a Thai like sauce, or you could do it with an apple. Things like salsa, you can throw in your eggs, or you can have with some tacos. Hummus is great as a snack or, with a meal. So these are just some really easy ways that you can just throw together some healthy meals without really having to think about it too much. And that is all I had for you, right on time. We have 15 minutes left for questions, but this was so lovely getting to chat with you all. I appreciate you listening to me yammer on for the last 45 minutes or so. And I'm really excited to answer the questions that you have. So I'll make sure I make plenty of time for that. If you do want a little bit more personalized nutrition advice, again, I know this was very general and high level, but you all have your own unique situations and you deserve that more individualized care. You can definitely shoot me an email, and I will help get you connected with a dietitian. We do have wonderful dietitians on my team that specialize in every area of nutrition. So I have some that really specialize in women's health, some that specialize in men's health, some people who specialize in cancer, or diabetes or heart disease or anything you might be kind of navigating, digestive issues. So love to help get you connected. And I assume maybe Jen, maybe you want to stop the recording before we get into the Q&A.
Yes.